Hi everybody, and it's time to paint some awesome Night Lords Saturnine. And for our base coat, we're mixing down 1 part Abaddon Black, 1 part Royal Blue, mixing this down with 2 parts water to a real thin consistency, and stipple this dark blue color onto our armor panels with our Artis Opus Series D size M brush. This will take round about 2 to 3 coats until everything is nicely covered, and you should end up with something like this. And then we're moving over to Royal Blue to create volumetric highlights on the raised areas where light would mostly hit the Mini, and we're mixing this down with 3 parts water and also gently stippling it onto the Mini with our Artis Opus Series D size M brush. And if you don't know where to place your highlights, simply take your primed Mini under a lamp, take a photo and use this photo as a reference for the light source. To enhance the volumetric highlights, we're then using Decals blue, thinned down with 2 parts water, and as you can see, I've now switched to Artis Opus Series D size S brush. This is simply just to have a little bit more precision while placing this very bright highlights compared to our base coat. And then it's already time to create the foundation of the iconic flash lightning that appears on every Night Lord's armor. And for this we're using pure Decals blue and creating very thick lines just that the flash lightning appears a little bit more glowing in the end. And my tip here is, if you don't know how to shape them, simply think about branches on a tree. With deep sky blue thinned down with 1 part water and a thin brush, I'm using an Artis Opus Series S size 00 brush here. We're then simply repainting a thinner version of the whole shape of the chain lightning. To enhance the flashes a little bit more and create a much more eye-catching look, we're then using P3 Morrow White thinned down with 1 part water. And what we're doing now is we're creating also a very thin version of the shape, but we're just painting it into the connection point of each branches of our flash lightning. Afterwards, we're using Corn Red thinned down with 1 part water and using a thicker brush to base coat all of the leather parts, which are the grip of the Thunderhammer and the loincloth. Afterwards, we're using pure dark aluminium of the Vallejo Metallics airbrush series and base coating all of the armor trims and metal parts. And to be honest, I underestimated the size of the armor a little bit. This step took me round about 1.5 hours because there are so many metal parts and trims on this armor. And the next thing is, as I was done painting it and I was putting the Mini into my display cabinet and I had it next to a dreadnought, I realized, oh my god, this Saturnine Praetor is almost as big as a Contemptor dreadnought, basically. So for everyone who asked me in the last couple of months if I might paint a vehicle like a dreadnought or a Reno, I basically did now. And after 1.5 hours of base coating madness, you should end up with something like this. And then it's time to base coat all of the black parts with 1 part Abaddon black and 1 part water. And as you can see, I'm over painting the head here. And this is simply because as I started with base coating the armor and created the color scheme, I thought, I need to paint this head red. And in the end, I decided that I want the head blue again, so I will repaint it in the end anyways. But to stick with the stage, we're now base coating the weapon casing and all of the cables on the armor and the weapon. As a first highlight for the black parts, we're then using dark warm gray of Pro Acryl and simply creating thick volumetric highlights all over the black parts. As a second highlight, we're then using pure neutral gray of Pro Acryl and simply creating thinner highlights above the thicker dark warm gray highlights underneath. And on a weapon casing, we're starting to create edge highlights all around the weapon casing and create smaller volumetric highlights on the surfaces. As final light reflection highlights, we're then using bright neutral gray of Pro Acryl, and on the weapon casing we're simply painting all of the upper edges, and for the cables we're thinning this mix down with a little bit of water to create a smooth transition with the color underneath and create reflection highlights in the center and the upper edges on the cables. To create smoother transitions and a little bit of a used look to the black parts, we're then mixing Abaddon black down with 4 parts water to 1 part paint and using this glaze mix more in a wash-like pattern and pushing the pigments into the shaded direction of each black part. And to fast put on some highlights onto the leather parts, I simply dry brush them with pure Mephiston red. For the dry brushing, I used the Artis Opus Series D extra small plus brush, and for the areas that were a little bit more hard to reach, I simply used the Artis Opus Series D regular extra small brush. Then it's already time to put on some decals. For this we're preparing the surface with Microsol, applying a decal, overcoat the decal again with a little bit of Microsol and gently pushing it a little bit more onto the surface with a Q-tip. And to bring a little bit more of variation onto the helmet with some bone color, we're base coating the lower part with pure ivory of Pro Acryl. To add a tiny amount of highlights, we're using bright ivory and creating a small volumetric highlight and highlighting the lower edge underneath the eye. Then it's time to cover the whole mini with a full coat of gloss varnish and creating an oil wash. For the oil wash I used 1 part Schminke burnt sienna and 1 part black ivory and added as much mineral spirit that I created a contrast-like consistency. With this mixture we're covering with a big brush basically the whole mini, and then it's time to wait until everything is dry. This takes around about 12 to 24 hours. To clean up the surfaces, we're then using eye bronze applicators. I used around about 3 to 4 here, and simply wiping all of the remainings of the surfaces off while remaining it in the recesses. And to remove the gloss afterwards, we're using a full coat of Vallejo Premium Satin varnish and bring back the dull armor look. To highlight the metal parts, we're then using Pro Acryl Silver and gently dry brushing all of the metal parts with the Artes Opus Series D small dry brush. And be a little bit more patient here, just do a gently dry brush because compared to the dark aluminium base coat, this Pro Acryl Silver color is very bright, but this helps us to create with a gently dry brush outstanding metallic highlights. As final highlights for the metal parts, we're using Iron Breaker of Citadel and creating a couple of edge highlights around the trims and also highlighting all of the armor balls around the mini. And this time I wanted to create a very easy glowing plasma effect that is basically achievable by everyone. So I used pure bold titanium white, thinned it down with 2 parts water that it flows nice into the recesses of the plasma coils. Then I used Doom Fire Magenta, thinned this also down with 2 parts water to 1 part paint and painted it all over the plasma coils and let it also flow into the recesses. Then I repainted with my side of the brush all of the raised areas of the plasma coils with pure bold titanium white, so it's not thinned down. And then I used Imperial Fist contrast, also thinned down with 2 parts water to 1 part paint and overcoated all of the plasma coils again. To create the surrounding glowing effect, I then used Mephiston Red, thinned it down with 4 parts water to 1 part paint to create a glaze, and then I gently started to glazing this mixture into the direction of the plasma coils. In the center of the weapon itself, I used a little bit of a thicker mix and created a straight line on both sides. To finish up the surrounding glowing effect, I used 4 parts water and 1 part Fire Dragon Bright and highlighted the most raised areas and all the surrounding edges of the light source. And this was basically the last step before we're done with the mini, except for basing. So now it's time to take a look into our final result. Thank you everybody so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I hope you had some fun and I hope to see you soon.